Good afternoon. We have the 4 candidates this afternoon running for Congressional District 5 joining us. Also, Joe Salkowski is joining us this afternoon. Joe is a political reporter at the Arizona Daily Star, one of the most knowledgeable people in the state of Arizona when it comes to politics. So hopefully the two of us can ask these candidates some tough questions this afternoon.
See what we can do.
We have incumbent Jim Kolbe joining us today. Welcome, Jim. We have Aage Nost joining us, who's running with the Libertarian Party, Michael Green from the Green Party, and George Cunningham from the Democratic Party. One of the things that people are talking about in the Congressional District 5 race is the ad war that's going on, George, between you and Jim Kolbe. I want to talk a little bit about that. George Cunningham, you've been running ads with children saying that Jim Kolbe voted against reducing class sizes, against fully funding Head Start, and against hiring new teachers. Jim Kolbe very adamantly insists you are distorting his record. Jim, let me start with you. What is your record?
Well, I have a record, Sandy, of supporting education at all levels. We just have George and I have a difference of opinion about how it ought to be done. My view is that we should give these dollars back to the states, the local school districts, to parents and teachers to decide how to do it. The current labor, health, education, and education bill that we have on the floor right now, it's in conference, has every single dollar that the president has asked for school construction and for classroom size reduction. Every single dollar. $1.4 billion for classroom size reduction, $1.3 billion for construction. It's all in the education bill. The only difference is that we would put it in a block grant to the states so local school districts can make decisions about how best to fund it. That's a fundamental difference that I have with my opponent. He believes, as President Clinton does, that we have to just specify exactly how it's going to be spent, and each school district has to be held to that. So that's the difference that we have, and the ads, frankly, do distort that position. But beyond that, I just think it's unfortunate to use children to deliver negative messages. I just think it's a wrong thing to do.
George?
Well, the ads really don't distort his record. He did vote against motions to recommit measures which would have increased by approximately $1 billion the amount of money available for hiring 100,000 new teachers, as well as ensuring that we'd have reduction in class sizes. There was also a provision in that amendment that he voted against, that Jim Kolbe voted against, which provided for $1.3 billion in additional school construction money. Those dollars are not now in the aggregate form in the HSR measure that he talked about, and that in fact his record on education has been very weak in terms of how he's voted. At one time he voted he voted to eliminate all major programs within the Department of Education. At another time he has voted against measures which provide for full funding that the President requested in Head Start. So his voting record in that regard is, in fact, not distorted by my ads. And as far as the children are concerned in the ads, you know, the parents, if you knew the parents of these children, you'd know that they are loving and caring people. And they would never do anything that would suggest the kinds of representations that are being made in Jim Kolbe's ads.
Jim, I think we need some reaction from you. You're sitting down there shaking.
Well, I am shaking my head because it's simply not true that we voted to abolish the Department of Education. There was a budget back in 1995 that was adopted, and the budget resolution has just aggregate figures for functions like defense and education. And the background to that, the report that goes with it, may say we contemplate saving some money by eliminating the Department of Education, but there never was a vote to do that. So it's just simply not true.
Do you think there's a difference in the terms of the level of funding that you each would support? I mean, you're a Republican congressman, he's a Democratic challenger. Democrats tend to support more federal spending on average than Republicans. Do you think is it possible that you would like less funding than George has proposed for any particular reason?
I don't think there's a very big difference on the amount of funding. I think it's more on how we spend it. As I said, the bill that we have before us now has exactly the same number of dollars that the president requested for classroom size, classroom construction and school classroom reduction, size reduction. But the difference is that it gives it to the states in order to do it, and I think that's the fundamental difference.
And I think that the important point to make is that when you allow those states to make that decision, there's not one guaranteed dollar for classroom size reduction, just like the states were given the authority to enter the Children's Health Insurance Program, the CHIP program, And our state was given $116 million, and we're returning $76 million. So there is no guarantee that there is any classroom reduction in the funding unless you provide that that is exactly what the money is going to be used for.
Now, Michael Green, what role do you see the federal government having in education?
Number one, I think it's time we got by the ad wars and got back to the substantive issues, so I'm glad to be here this afternoon. I think the federal government's a perfect place to funnel money through, but I tend to agree that we want, the Greens believe, that education is a matter of a community-based necessity and need, that the community should be able to respond and allocate some of that money themselves. There's certainly some excellent federal programs, including Head Start. I understand the difference between the Republicans and Democrats primarily is the allocation. I don't recall if the figure is 60 million or 600 million that has been cut out. The Republicans want to spend in this particular way as opposed to what the Democrats see. We think, again, that a community should be able to make decisions locally based to address needs in the community rather than letting the federal government dictate how all funds should be spent.
Mr. Nost, we haven't heard from you. What is the Libertarian Party's position on federal support for local education?
Well, I think that wherever we turn, we see more federal government in our life that is good for us. And especially when it comes to education, the federal government should have no participation in it hardly whatsoever, because it should be done locally, right here in Arizona and in the local community. If you look at education, there's something that is wrong there. Because when you see homeschooling perform traditionally better than what the regular school system does, and let's say a single mother produce a better educated child than the regular school system does, there's something wrong here. And what we need to remember that you just don't throw money at a problem when there's something wrong, then all you get is a bigger and more funded problem. We need to tear the house down, start over again, and get a society where we don't have 600,000 kids that can't even read their high school diploma after they graduate like we do now. It's the only country in the world that have that. We need to revamp the whole thing and start over again. And it can be done. There's enough money to do this if you go after it.
Let's talk about environment. Jim, you are running ads touting your efforts to protect the Sonoran Desert. George Cunningham, you have said that Jim Kolbe is no friend of the environment. Explain yourself, George.
Well, it's a total mischaracterization of Jim Kolbe to say he is a friend of the environment. The National Conservation League of Voters, which is a collection of a number of environmental groups, and it's not a partisan group as represented by his campaign, they have rated him in terms of the votes that he has cast over the past 6 years, and his average vote in terms of when he votes for environmental issues is 18% over that period of time, and 82% of the time he votes against environmental issues. So he cannot be characterized as someone who is friendly to the environment.
Well, the League of Conservation Voters may not have a D after it, but it is historically been an organization that has supported Democrats. It's also one that has very much of an Eastern orientation to it. And in the East Coast, the issues are very different. They're much more about clean air and clean water, whereas out here, more of our issues have to do with land use issues. And in those areas, I'm very proud of our record. The creation of the San Pedro National Conservation Area, the creation of the Gila Box National Conservation Area, and I believe this week we'll be successful with the Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area, 3 of the 8 conservation areas in the United States here in the 5th Congressional District, changing Saguaro National Monument to Saguaro National Park, the funding to expand those boundaries and to include the land inside those boundaries within the federal government. I think that those are the kinds of things that we should be doing. I've been very much at the forefront of trying to get $1 million, for example, to the county, Pima County, for the Sonoran Conservation Desert Plan, for the planning of that. That's vital. If we're going to develop a plan in our community that has a consensus of the community around the way in which we should grow, we have to have that plan. And then we can have some managed growth with that. But we have to protect the habitat, and we have to protect the beautiful lands that is around us. And the Sonoran Conservation Desert Plan will do that.
Anyone that would represent that clean air and clean water are not concerns of western states or of Arizona is certainly into reality denial in terms of what is needed in the environmental area in this state. We are constantly working to ensure that the air quality, not only locally but in Phoenix and elsewhere, is breathable, and we're doing the same with water. And all of the investment that's being made to try to clean up water through the through the aquifers as well as through the cleaning up the soil. So I can't see that the case has been made that the League of Conservation Voters is an Eastern organization. It is in fact a Western organization. They're concerned about timbering and logging and all the kinds of issues that affect our economy as well as affect our environment.
Well, just on the clean air, a good example is that in the East Coast, of course, it has to do with burning of low sulfur coal to produce energy. And here in the West, it has more to do with automobile emissions with our large populations and sprawling populations. There is a difference in the emphasis there, and that's what I was trying to point out.
Seems to me there may be a difference in sources, but the problem's common to everybody across the country. And I may have misread this morning. Wasn't there not an appropriation, a bill that you voted on, and I believe this was in the Star, and the tail end of it was either going to a water or air allocation that you voted against, which would have raised standards or enforced standards against certain types of business.
It all has to do with the kind of standards you're going to have. I mean, are the standards going to be ones that are developed for eastern states, or are they going to be ones that take into account the fact that we drive more here in the West? It's the same thing that has to do with the funding for the highways. How do we calculate that formula? There's a difference that occurs there. No, I'm for clean air, absolutely, and we've had substantial improvements. In fact, every one of the major cities in the United States has had an improvement in air quality in the last 10, 15, last 20 years here. So we are moving in the right direction.
I wonder if we're moving fast enough. In the last 8 years during the Clinton administration, there's been very little, if anything, done to address the question of point source emissions from automobiles and, of course, industrial waste. The Greens tend to think that a new economic paradigm would, in fact, flow from enhanced environmental standards, that it would give birth to new industries in the process of cleaning up our environment, and the cost that business resist and claim that make imposition of environmental regulation tough on them actually would give birth to new sources of economic well-being.
Aage, what do you think about the way the federal government's gone about protecting the environment?
Well, I kind of think we're going down the wrong avenue here, because we are allowing the federal government to come in and regulate our lives. They're taking the land away from people that has owned it for generations, and they're doing things with the land in our community that we have no say-so. In fact, it goes way beyond that. When they take the land away from the owners, it goes to the federal government, and the federal government now has given ownership over to the United Nations. Many of the national parks in this country is owned by the United Nations, not just owned, it's titled to it.
I think that begs the question, how do you deal with the environment and pollution? I guess that's...
Yeah, that's the question. I don't think there's a man or woman alive that don't want clean air, but I think the decisions, the major decisions that affect our life in the local community should be done here. And I think if the federal government came involved in funding some of this, then the decisions could be made here and done here, where actually we know what's going on in our local area.
Well, now, one of
We
the
need
other...
to correct the record here. None of those national parks title has not been given over to the United Nations, and none of them, even if they've been designated as international biodiversity areas, doesn't change the way the laws or the rules by which we govern those and take care of those. It doesn't give the United Nations any authority over that.
Boy, I would like to discuss that one sometime.
Well, perhaps we'll discuss it
You got
another
some
time.
papers that show different.
One of the